Hello and welcome to Circle Time, the Early Years podcast with me, Glenn Denny. Now, on the programme on this edition, I'm delighted to have the author, trainer, consultant. Did I mention author? Yes, I think I did. The amazing Tamsin Grimmer with the absolute passion of loving pedagogy. Well, we are loving having you here. Tamsin, welcome.
Thank you ever so much.
So tell us a bit more. So loving pedagogy, we're starting to hear more about this, but it's still quite a fresh thing, do you think?
It is really, yes. I think love isn't always talked about in the context of early childhood education. It's perhaps a bit of a taboo subject. For obvious reasons, I suppose. But there was some excellent research by a lady called Jules Page, who you may have come across, who was looking at if educators want if parents want professional educators to love their children, and she's been researching into that area and called this professional love for some years now. And I'm kind of coming at it along a similar vein, but in a slightly different way as well. So I'm thinking about what we do in our schools and what we do in our settings on a daily basis to help children to feel loved. And for me, I think it's about an approach to give children a sense of belonging and to put things like attachment theory into practice.
Brilliant. I know, like you say, like that professional love bit I've heard, and I that there is quite a bit of research about that. But I like the way it's kind of extended out slightly. So it's kind of that, yes, we can love our children, but there's more to it than that, really, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I think it's a shame, really, that in the English language we only have one word to describe love, because there's so many different facets to love. There's so many different aspects. And, I love my children in a very different way to the way I love my dog or my husband or chocolate even. So, we use the same word, don't we? And sometimes that's unhelpful. So, love is about having intense feelings, but it's also about action. And I think that's when it's much more applicable to early childhood, because it's about putting children at the centre of our practice, putting their needs first, holding them in mind when we're not with them, enjoying being together.
Absolutely. And I think there's that bit as well. I mean, various people that I've spoken to on the podcast, it kind of all ties in together about, the children are very much at the center of what we do. And if we don't love what we do and love the children in our own professional way, then why are we doing this job? It's almost like we're having to question that, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. And it's all about relationship. We need relationships to be central, in our practice. And so many of us do love the children in our care, whether we call it that or not.
Yes.
We would actually have that feeling if we were to unpick it. And when I'm delivering training sessions around loving pedagogy, that's one of the things that we do. We sort of think, well, what is love? And we look at the example of a parent. How does a parent demonstrate that they love their child? And of course there are practical ways. So they'll look after meet their basic needs. They'll feed them, they'll clothe them. But it's so much more than that, isn't it? It's there's the emotional side, there's boundary setting, there's standing out in the pouring rain and watching children play football on a Sunday when you'd rather be doing something else. There are all sorts of levels that and things that parents do that demonstrate their love. Obviously you've got the tactile side as well, the physical sort of hugs and kisses, and I think the same is true in our settings. And another thing that I draw upon, or some more research that I draw upon, is something called love languages, which I don't know if you've come across them, Glenn?
No, tell me more.
Ooh, wow. So there's some researchers called Chapman and Campbell who were looking into the difference between being loved and feeling loved. Okay, so if you bear with me for a minute. So if you think about it, there are different ways that we like to be loved. So some people, we're coming, as we're recording this, we're coming up to Valentine's Day. And some people might really feel loved if they're given a dozen red roses or
Mhm.
something like that. Somebody else would say, what a waste of money. You could have taken me out for dinner for that. Somebody
Mhm.
else would say, I would much rather go for a walk with the person I love, because spending time together is what's important to me.
Yes. Yes.
So there's different ways that we kind of feel loved, and they pick up on this, and they think about it in the context of relationships, and they also think about it in the context of adult parent-child relationships. And if you think about it in that context, you could have a situation where a child is being hugged and kissed all the time because their parent loves them so much, they're always hugging them and kissing them,
Mhm.
but perhaps the parent doesn't feel able to say I love you. Now, if that child's love language, as they would call it, is hugs and kisses, they're going to feel really loved because they
Yes.
hugged and kissed all the time. If their child's love language is actually words and they need to hear those words, they might not feel loved, even though they are loved. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. It does. And it kind of goes back to something you'd said before, that, we have this one word for a feeling or an emotion, but actually it just spreads so far and wide and in so many different directions. It's almost like an underground, like the London Underground map. Which line
Mm.
is, it's all one line. We got the
Yeah.
Northern Line, the Bakerloo line, the Jubilee line. I am a bit of an underground nerd, I'm sorry. But for love, it's all one line, but it just goes off in so many different directions
It
because
does.
it's different things to different people for different situations.
Absolutely. And it's so important that our children feel loved, because I
Mhm.
think that will have a knock-on effect to their learning as well. Because if you think of Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, children need to be feeling safe and secure, and love and belonging is in his hierarchy of needs. And I think it's part and parcel of children, that whole feeling of it's okay, I'm okay here, I'm home, or I'm feeling safe. And if children have that feeling, they will be more ready to learn.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's I think even as adults, if we feel loved, we feel secure, we feel safe.
Yeah.
We know where we are. We know that if something's not right, there's somebody that we know that loves us, we can go
Yeah.
to. And I think that's important for the children in our care, that
Yes.
there is that love, no matter what we choose to call it, whether it's love or whatever, that if they feel secure enough, then there is that element of love going on, isn't there?
Absolutely. And every day we all have, I mean, one of the things I talk about, lots of people talk about this, it's not my concept, but lots of people talk about this idea that we've got an emotional cup that gets filled or emptied every day, depending on what happens in our lives. And some of our children are going to come into our schools and settings with an empty or a half empty emotional cup,
Mm-hmm.
maybe because of something serious like adverse childhood experiences or
Yep.
trauma, something not pleasant that's happened in their lives. But it could simply be, for some of our young children, that they've run out of shreddies. Other cereals are available, of course, but it could be something really simple, because we know that some things that are really quite small and we might see as insignificant can have a massive impact on our children, and so they might be coming into our settings really dysregulated and feeling out of sorts and not okay. And actually they might behave in ways that would be very attention seeking, or they might be withdrawn or upset or angry. And we need to be detectives in a way and kind of work it out, but also be accepting and recognize that this child, they're not okay at the moment, so we need to give them as much love, attention, quality time as we possibly can to fill their cup up again. So Rebecca Brooks actually she writes about attachment aware schools, and she talks about reframing attention seeking behaviors to attachment seeking behaviors. And I just think that's really helpful, because it reminds us of the need in the
It does
child.
actually, yeah, because we all need to feel wanted or needed, but
Yeah.
equally we also need to know, we need to need somebody as well. And
Yeah.
it is all through our lives, as from children as well. If we've got that secure attachment with somebody or some people,
Yes.
then we feel more confident as individuals.
Absolutely. It's just, it needs to underpin everything, really.
It really
Yes.
does. I mean, I'm thinking back as well. Now, I've been in this game for an awfully long time. I've been 26 years or something like that. But there was that bit where before kind of that term of professional love was around. I remember being in one setting where we were told, children will just automatically say, "I love you," because
Yes.
they hear it at home and it becomes a thing. But they're starting to work out what this word means, and it means that they care for somebody. But again, we were told that, you know, you're not we were told as practitioners, you don't respond saying, "Oh, I love you too." We weren't allowed to do that. And do you know,
Yeah.
sometimes I think it's down to that misinterpretation of what that word means, that one single
Absolutely.
word with so many hundreds of different meanings.
Yes. And I'm often asked, actually, that's one of, if I could say, what's the question you're asked most regularly as a result of your work around loving pedagogy, it's, what do I do if a child says I love you? And my response is actually, first of all, well, do you love them?
Mm,
Because if you love them, I personally have no problem with an adult saying to a child, "I love you," in a professional context.
mhm.
However, it does come with a bit of a caveat, because clearly we need to be working, if we're in a school or a setting, we need to be working within our policies. I would suggest that our policies need to allow us to do that. So that's where I go, because obviously safeguarding children's got to be a really top priority,
Absolutely.
as does safeguarding staff as well. So we have to be realistic about it, but at the same time we shouldn't be worrying about these things. If a child is saying "I love you," using words, if we don't feel able to say "I love you" back, then we can say, "That's made me feel really special. Thank you so much." Because
Mm,
it's a lovely thing for somebody to tell you that. Or maybe you can reciprocate in another way. Another child might be saying "I love you" by finding you the biggest conker, or the most beautiful flower in the outside area, and
mhm.
presenting it to you, and it's a love token.
Yeah,
And Chapman and Campbell would call that the love language of gifts. And children do that, don't they? We regularly get children giving us special things, so we can reciprocate. We can find them a really special pebble and say, "I saw this and I thought of you," and present it to them as a love token. So it's about being attuned to children as well, I think, and responding and reciprocating, so that we're sort of on their wavelength, and
mhm.
then obviously helping them to feel loved through what we do and what we say.
Definitely. I think as well, I think it's almost like, particular as older practitioners, maybe the younger ones that are coming into it don't really have that same kind of baggage, I suppose, around it, that we've got to unpack and
Mm.
kind of put away. That, for the older practitioner, we need to kind of think clearly about it. And, are there steps that we can take to kind of help ourselves to understand more?
I think talking about it is a really important thing. So if you are a member of a team, then talking to your other team members is really important. I think the more we use the terminology of love, if you like, then the better. But we need to be clear about what we're talking about. So another sort of element of this that I suppose we're kind of touching on, no pun intended here, is actually the area of touch, because that's another thing we really need to talk about with each other,
Mhm.
because we need to be clear about how we will appropriately touch children in our settings, how we might use touch as in a loving way
Yeah.
to our children, and obviously at the same time making sure that that's reflected in our policies and things like that as well. So I think that's important to talk
Hmm.
about it. That would be my first thing. And get to know your children, keep them at the center and at the heart of your practice. And I think if when we're doing that, acting in loving ways, it's a natural thing to do. It's a very
Yeah.
natural way to be, and it almost sort of Jules Page would say, it gives you permission to love them.
It does. There was something there that you were saying about the kind of the element of touch through,
Mm.
the loving touch kind of thing, that it kind of gave me a flashback to, during the time of COVID, when the setting I was at the time, we'd all had to close, unfortunately, just because of where we were all based. And I remember talking to parents, we were talking them through about what our procedures were going to be when we reopened and everything. And the one thing that every single parent asked me, and this isn't an exaggeration, every parent that I spoke to asked me, are you going to be able to hug them?
Ah,
And that was a very interesting thing that, can we still hug and things like that? And it was like, well, yes, of course we will be.
yes. So that was obviously important to the families.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think it was that need for, they've been with their children, and it was a worrying, scary time for all of us. And obviously
yeah,
they wanted that need and that love to be shown across the board, like from home
yeah,
to setting as well.
yeah. Absolutely. Interestingly, there was some research that happened during COVID that looked at touch, and I'm just going to try and find the headline for you, because it actually said something like, here we are, touch is as important to child development as healthy food.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually, there was a report by a working group of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on a Fit and Healthy Childhood. So I think it was in England that they produced this report. But it basically came out saying that that basic human contact was just as essential to a child's development as nutrition. And it's
Mm-hmm.
based on some work. There's a professor from Liverpool John Moores University who looks at touch, and he obviously looks at the hormones that are produced when we are lovingly touched. So
Mm-hmm.
we have oxytocin, we have dopamine, serotonin, endorphins. These are all really positive sort of chemicals,
Yes.
loving chemicals, if you like. And they can help to relieve stress and block pain. So it's, there's a lot of research that backs up the importance of loving touch as well.
It absolutely is. And if you think about it in a daycare setting as well, I mean, we have our babies that are constantly needing held or touched, and
Yeah,
like there's all that, and there's that closeness and that warmth. But as they get older, there's slightly less of it. But should there be? There's, that's
good
that's
question.
a question. Yeah, that kind of it makes you think. The more you kind of unpick it, you think, well, we do a lot
Yeah.
of that. There's that close contact as they're babies because they need it. Obviously they need us a lot more.
Mm,
But as they get older and they become more mobile, it's like, how much should we back off, or
yeah,
should we listen to the rhythm of the child and what their needs
absolutely.
are?
So, Glenn, absolutely the latter. We should definitely be just being attuned to the children, listen to them, and respond appropriately. Sadly, I've heard quite a few practitioners in perhaps preschool rooms who feel that in order to help children be ready for school, they will, reduce the amount that they're sort of cuddling or putting children on their laps, or, inviting children to snuggle down with the story, things like that, because they feel that they might not have this in primary school.
Mm-hmm.
In really great, effective primary schools, there will still be loving touch. And, I feel quite strongly about that. When I was teaching in schools, I obviously was working within the policies, but the policies in those schools allowed me to, if a child wanted to sit on my lap, they could sit on my lap. And personally, I wouldn't have chosen to work in a school that didn't have that sort of policy, because obviously it's something I feel very strongly about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a false idea that we have to get children out of this habit of wanting to be lovingly held or whatever, because as an adult I still like to be lovingly held,
Yeah.
and I still like to hold my children's hands, and 2 out of 3 of them are teenagers now, so they may not want to do it in public so much, but it's still, I think touch is, it goes into adulthood, and it's appropriate.
Absolutely should. I mean, it's that bit yourself. If even as an adult, if if you get some bad news or you just had the
Mm,
worst day ever,
mm,
just a cuddle and,
yeah,
everything melts away. And if you think about a child who's still trying to process this whole big, crazy world that we live in, and they just get all
yeah.
overwhelmed with it, they want somebody there, right
Mm,
then, who's safe enough for them to go and get a cuddle from. Like, and I
yeah,
think that's an important word as well. They feel safe with them. And again,
yes.
it's down to that appropriateness, like that those clear boundaries as well.
And listening to the child, because
Mhm.
if I've had a bad day and I think, right, I'm going to go into a setting and I feel like I need lots of cuddles today, that's not appropriate.
Mhm.
But if I go into the setting and a child is in need and they come to me to meet that emotional need and they
Mhm.
want to cuddle, it's definitely appropriate. So we do need to think about who's initiating the contact and things like that, and
Yeah.
whose need is it meeting. But it is absolutely appropriate to yes, lovingly cuddle or whatever our children. But touch doesn't have to be that. It could be ruffling of the hair. It could
Mhm.
be a squeeze of the shoulder or a high five. So, we think about kisses and cuddles and things like that. But actually, it can be just holding hands in the playground. It doesn't have to be the
Mhm.
sort of the more intimate type of cuddles and kisses that we often think about.
Absolutely does. I mean, yeah, it's when you say things like that, it obviously brings back, elements of my own practice. And, you'll be outside supervising outdoor play, and a child will come up and you'll just get this little hand into your hand, and you're like,
Yes,
you just automatically go and close it around theirs. And,
absolutely.
because that's what they want. They just want to walk with you. They maybe don't even want to say anything. And again,
No,
it's listening to or responding appropriately to what the child is either telling you verbally or non-verbally.
yeah, yeah. It's special. I think if a child trusts you and responds to you in that way, then it's part and parcel of having that nurturing relationship with them, isn't it? To then respond to them, be sensitive in return.
It definitely is.
Mm.
I mean, again, I think that we were talking before about how we've gone from like the sort of professional love aspect, which again is something not fairly new, but I mean, it when I first started, that was a not a thing. It was not a
Yeah.
thing. But I like the fact that you're now expanding it more, so it becomes embedded within our practice. How have you found, like, working with settings and that? Do you find it's difficult for them to implement it, or do you find it's actually that they're just very on board with it?
I've actually found, rather than it being difficult for them to implement, I've actually found the opposite. Many, many settings have said to me, thank you for articulating our approach. Because my work, my book, just to give a really quick plug, it's called Developing a Loving Pedagogy in the
Mhm.
Early Years. But what I've actually tried to do within it is include lots of case studies from preschools and nurseries and schools.
Mhm.
So anyone working with children sort of under 5, really, and some childminders, to try and make sure that their voice is represented throughout. So it's quite practice based, in terms of the book. So what I found is people have been sort of saying to me, this is what we do. We just didn't have a word for it before.
Mhm.
So I think it's been quite affirming for some settings.
Mhm.
And I've worked with quite a few now, amazing settings who've shared their loving pedagogy with me. We're all learning. I'm still learning loads all the time, and I'm learning a lot from them. And now I'm just trying to sort of look at it in a bit more detail, really, and trying to unpick all the different little aspects of a loving pedagogy and what that looks like in
Yeah,
practice. So I'm sort of doing that with a few settings at the moment, in the hope that I can then put that together and present that to the world in the future. So
absolutely. No, it's interesting you say that there's a lot of settings out there that do it as well.
mm,
But do you think when you were researching the book and you found all these settings that were doing this and kind of that you'd worked with and things, but do you find there's you know a lot of people kind of go and see themselves in these certain settings as well. Like there is a bit of like, oh, that's us. That's us. Like, you know, people literally go, wow, actually, I didn't know this is what we did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think quite a few people may not have thought about using the terminology
Mhm.
love or loving in relation to their work. But I'm hoping that that shift is changing a little bit, because I think people sort of realise, yes, that is what we do, and so let's call a spade a spade. You know, it is a loving approach. So yeah, I think it's important that we
It is,
acknowledge
and
that.
you know, and the child is at the center of what we do. And
Yeah.
if we didn't love what we do,
Mm.
then we wouldn't be doing it. So it, like you say, it's important that word is used. But again, I think as well, do you think it's about challenging people's perception of that word? You know,
Yeah.
the L word, that, you know, it's kind of
Yes.
like almost frightening sometimes for some people. Like, no, I can't say
Well,
that.
I guess it's tricky because there are sexual connotations with the word love, so we have to kind of get that elephant in the room out of the way.
Yes.
But clearly that's not what we're referring to when we're thinking about our practice. So I think it's in the absence of any other words. You know, I guess we could try and use synonyms. We could talk about care or warmth or you know, nurture, although I think a loving approach is a nurturing approach. But I think all these words have their own benefits, but they're not the same thing. So I
No,
think it's yeah,
when you say care, to me, I think of basic care needs. So like
yeah,
wiping a runny nose or changing
changing a
nappies.
nappy.
Yeah, exactly. I think of that. But with love, it's a very impactful word.
Yes.
But I think for us as well, it's maybe even like with settings, looking at their policies and how they describe to parents, particularly, we use the word love, and this is what it means to us. Do you think
Absolutely.
that's a good way of like get that definition to parents of this is our
Yes.
definition of love?
It absolutely is. And I think that there are two policies that we really need to get this into. One, I would say, is your safeguarding policy. You need to be talking about appropriate loving touch within that.
Mhm.
And the other policy is actually, some people would call it a behaviour policy. I've been working with quite a few settings recently that are shifting that, and they're calling it a relationships policy, which is a different, slightly different take
Mhm.
on moving away from this idea that behavior is something to be managed, because it isn't.
Yeah.
But it's actually seeing behavior as communication, and so actually this is about nurturing the communication between us and the child. So a relationships policy is kind of the way that some people are doing that. So I think yeah, thinking about it within policy is a really great place to start, and then making sure that families are aware of what we're doing and
Mhm.
how we're talking about things. So you know, sharing it with our families as well. But actually I think it's about it comes back down to what we do on a daily basis with the children, because we, like you said, we keep the children at the centre of our practice.
Mhm.
We enjoy spending time with them, quality time with them. We show a genuine interest in their lives. You know, we try to empower the children, be advocates for them, so
Mhm.
that we can help the children to feel that they have a voice and are listened to. It's about to a certain extent helping children understand about acting in loving, caring ways, being
Yeah.
a good friend, for example, or even, you know, sustainability, thinking about looking after our world.
Mhm.
So all of these sorts of things are really important as well. But again, it's attachment theory put into practice. So you know, it's building those relationships. It's developing our learning environment to create lovely cozy corners where children can kind of try to self-regulate if they're feeling overwhelmed, or you know, all of these things sort of all bundled up together, for me, is what a loving pedagogy is all about.
Sounds amazing as well. But there was, when you were talking there again, it made me think about how important it is for us to help children to understand the
Mm,
different meanings of love, and how important that the different areas and different aspects of love that there are, and understanding and respecting them as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. So when I first started looking into love, it was actually I went back to university and did a master's degree because I wanted to research love. So for my dissertation, I looked at, is there a place for love in an early childhood setting? So that was actually what I was looking at, and clearly I found there was. So that was kind of in a nutshell. But one of the things I did obviously was try to think about try to define love, which actually is much more difficult than you would think. But one of the definitions that I chose to look at in my dissertation, and sometimes refer to in my training, is actually from the Bible, and it talks about, there's a passage that talks about love, and it actually says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. Love is not rude, it is not self-seeking. Love is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. So some people have come across this from just a wedding service or something. For some people, they've never heard it before, but it's a beautiful piece of writing that I think reminds us of what love really means. And it's about action. It's not about lovely, warm, fuzzy feelings. It's, love keeps no record of wrongs. Love is patient. This is about us being patient and kind with our children. Yes. Every day is a fresh start for our children, so that when they come in, it doesn't really matter what happened yesterday, if there were mistakes made or if they were upset. Today is a clean sheet for that child. And I think things like that are really important. And I think we need to kind of think about these characteristics of what a loving, I know that there's a phrase, isn't there? If you can be anything, be kind. Yeah. And this is kind of what it comes down to for me. It's about, if we can be anything, let's be loving and kind.
Absolutely. Well, Tamsin, if we could be anything, it would definitely be to have you on again if you would love to. But thank you so much for your time on the podcast. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Glenn.